It is now in order to consider the amendment by the gentleman from Texas, Mr. Paul. For what purpose does the gentleman from Texas rise?
I have an amendment at the desk.
The clerk will designate the amendment.
An amendment offered by Mr. Paul of Texas to the amendment in the nature of a substitute, number 13, offered by Mr. Shays of Connecticut.
Pursuant to the order of the House of Friday, July 17, 1998, the gentleman from Texas, Mr. Paul.
Point of order, I believe this is a perfecting amendment. It's not in the nature of a substitute. And that has been cleared in the Rules Committee.
Clerk designated as Amendment 2, the amendment designated in the nature of a substitute.
Both of the amendments that I have should be perfecting amendments. And if permissible, I ask unanimous consent that they both be accepted as
Amendment 2, the amendment in the nature of a substitute.
amendment.
The gentleman is amending the Shays-Meehan amendment in the nature of a substitute.
Okay. Thank you. Thank you for the clarification. My amendment is very simple. It's an amendment that deals with equity and fairness, so I would expect essentially no opposition to this. It simply lowers and standardizes the signature requirements and the time required to get signatures to get a federal candidate on the ballot. There are very many unfair rules and regulations by the states that makes it virtually impossible for many candidates to get on the ballot. And I want to make 4 points about the amendment. First, it's constitutional to do this. Article 1, Section 4 explicitly authorizes the U.S. Congress to, quote, at any time by law, make or alter such regulations regarding the manner of holding elections. This is the authority that was used for the Voters' Rights Acts of 1965. Second point I would like to make, it is an issue of fairness. Because of the excess petition requirements put on by so many states and the short period of time required, many individuals are excluded from the ballot. And for this reason, this should be corrected. There are some states, take for instance Georgia, wrote a law in 1943. There has not been one minor party candidate on the ballot since 1943 because he can't meet the requirements. This is unfair. This amendment would correct this. Number 3, the third point. In contrast to some who would criticize an amendment like this by saying that there would be overcrowding on the ballot, there have been statistical studies made of states where the number of requirements, of signature requirements, are very low and the time very generous. Instead of overcrowding, they have an average of 3.3 candidates per ballot. Now this is very important also because it increases interest and increases turnout. Today, turnout is going down every year. In the last 20 or 30 years, there has been a steady decline in interest. This amendment would increase the interest and increase the turnout. The fourth point that I would like to make is the setup and the situation we have now is so unfair. Many are concerned about how money is influencing the elections. But in this case, rules and regulations are affecting minor candidates by pushing up the cost of the election, where they can't afford the money to even get on the ballot. So it's very unfair in a negative sense that the major parties penalize any challengers. And the correction would come here by equalizing this, making it more fair, and I would expect, I think, just everybody to agree that this is an amendment of fairness and equity and should be accepted. And I reserve the balance of my time.
The gentleman reserves the balance of his time. For what purpose does the gentleman from Massachusetts rise?
I would request the time in opposition to the amendment.
The gentleman is recognized for 5 minutes.
Mr. Chairman, at this time, I would like to yield 3 minutes to the gentleman from New York, Mr. Bollitt.
The gentleman is recognized for 3 minutes.
I rise in opposition to this amendment, but the real purpose is to focus my remarks on the need for Shays-Meehan substitute rather than the specifics of this particular amendment, which are not the real issue. The reason we need Shays-Meehan is quite simple and quite stark. The legitimacy of the American political process is being undermined. I don't use these words lightly or as a mere rhetorical flourish. We can try to convince ourselves that all is well, salving ourselves with polls showing that the approval for Congress is relatively high. Ironically, some argue that all is well because money is flowing into our campaign coffers. This is like saying that a cancer patient is in better shape than someone without cancer because that person might have more cells. But in any event, a closer look tells a less rosy story. Polls show that many Americans don't know the first thing about Congress, the names of their representatives, which party is in control, and so forth. Discussions with average Americans uncover a deep cynicism about the political process. And looking at what in other circumstances we call the only poll that truly counts, Americans are simply abandoning the election booth. Turnout is at an all-time low. Alienation from the political system is at historical high. There could be no greater danger in a democracy. We are in the midst of a silent crisis. Campaign finance reform doesn't rank high as a concern in polls simply because no one believes we can truly do it. They believe we are hapless and that the situation is hopeless. So they just continue to turn away. This is as corrosive a disease for the body politic as can be imagined. And it is no less serious because the symptoms do not appear fully until it is too late to fashion a cure. So I congratulate Mr. Shays and Mr. Meehan for designing a cure while there is still time. Now, some people say that the side effects of this cure are so severe that we should just let the disease take its course. But that's simply wrong. The cure is as mild as sunshine, ensuring that everyone can see who is spending money to influence the political system. Shays Meehan is quite literally the very least we can do. Let's look at some of the concerns opponents of this bill raise. They say that, like previous efforts at reform, it has many loopholes and unintended consequences. Yet their solution is to have no system at all. In short, to get rid of individual loopholes by having a regime that is one giant void. That hardly seems like a positive alternative.
Would you yield the gentleman an additional 30 seconds?
Opponents also raise the specter of a system overrun by federal bureaucrats, their favorite bugaboo. But this is really another way of saying that they do not want any limits on the flow of money into the political system. Mr. Chairman, my colleagues, George Bernard Shaw once said, a society's morals are like its teeth. The more decayed they are, the more it hurts to touch them. It's no accident that it hurts so much to discuss our political morality. It's time to correct it at its roots. I urge my colleagues to vote down this amendment and to support the Shays-Meehan substitute.
Gentleman from Texas.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. My amendment, once again, lowers and standardizes the required signatures to get federal candidates on the ballot. There is a great deal of inequity among the states, and it works against the minor candidates and prevents many from even participating in the process. For this reason, many individuals have lost interest in politics. They are disinterested, and every year it seems that the turnout goes down. This year is no exception. 42% of the American people do not align themselves with a political party. 29% approximately align themselves with Republicans and Democrats. And yet the rules and the laws are written by the major party for the sole purpose of making it very expensive and very difficult and sometimes impossible to get on the ballot. If we had more competition and more openness, we would get more people out to vote. It would not clutter the ballot. It would not have overcrowding, but it would allow discourse, and it would be beneficial to the process. And I reserve the balance of my time.
Gentleman reserves balance of his time. Gentleman from Massachusetts.
Mr. Chairman, my problem with this amendment is it would prohibit states from erecting excessive ballot access barriers to candidates for federal office. It would set ballot petition signature limits for the President, Vice President, United States Senate, and House candidates. In addition, it would set ballot petition time limitations. Now, protections are important, but individual states should be allowed to control their campaign laws. Assuring there are no undue barriers to prevent individuals from running for federal office is imperative to keeping our political process fair. But I am concerned with the federal government imposing limitations on the states for how they govern ballot access. This deals with an important set of issues and should be dealt with not solely with this amendment, but rather should be fully debated in the House after the Shays-Meehan substitute has passed. And one of the things that the Shays-Meehan bill does is provide for an opportunity for debate and discussion through the Commission. And this is an issue that I think there should be hearings on. I think we should have a dialogue about, but I just don't think that an amendment to the Shays-Meehan bill is the appropriate place to deal with this issue. And with that, Mr. Chairman, I yield back whatever balance of the time I have.
Gentleman yields back the balance of his time. Gentleman from Texas.
Mr. Chairman, the gentleman suggests that we should leave this to the states. I quoted and cited the constitutional authority for this. It's explicit. We have the authority to do this. There are many, many unfair laws. Dealing with the president, for instance, the minor candidates on average to get on the ballot are required to get 701,000 signatures. A major candidate gets less than 50,000. To get on an average Senate seat ballot, 196,000 signatures are required for the Senate, $15,000 for the major candidates. In the House, on the average for the minor candidate, it's more than 13,000, where it's 2,000 for a major candidate. There's something distinctly unfair about this. This is un-American. We have the authority to do it. This is the precise time to do it. We're dealing with campaign reform, and they are forcing these minor candidates to spend unbelievable amounts of money. They are being excluded. They're 42% of the people in this country. They are the majority when you divide the electorate up. They deserve representation too.
Gentleman's time expired. All time having expired. The question is on the amendment offered by gentleman from Texas, Mr. Paul. Those in favor, please say aye. Those opposed, no. No. In the opinion of chair, the noes have it.
Mr. Chairman, I ask for a recorded vote.
Pursuant to House Resolution 442, further proceedings on the amendment offered by the gentleman from Texas will be postponed. Him again.